Today's guest is Steve Bolton. Steve was the former founder of Platinum Property Partners, PPP. From 2007 until 2017, he built PPP into one of the UK's leading HMO investment businesses, with more than £400 million of HMOs under management and 7,000 rental rooms in the portfolio. After leading a failed attempt to overturn Section 24 in the High Court back in 2016, Steve decided it was time to diversify and start investing in other asset classes. He started to exit PPP in 2017 and focused on investing into high-growth, early-stage EIS qualifying businesses in the tech and e-commerce sectors. Through Bolt Angels and other companies in the Bolt portfolio, Steve has yet again achieved remarkable success. Bolt's most recent investment, exiting at 46 times the original investment amount post-dilution, which is the equivalent of turning £100,000 into 4.6 million. Steve is also a dad of four, an avid boat and dog lover, and he spends his time between Bournemouth, London and Ibiza. Hello everybody and welcome to Your Property Podcast. My name is Michelle Kearns and with us today we've got very special guest Steve Bolton. Hi Steve, how are you?
Hi Michelle, very good, thank you.
Great. Well, I've just done the intro, so people have just got an overview about, your bio, a very high level about what you've been doing with Platinum Property Partners in the past, and what you're up to now. But your success to date in the business and property world has been quite considerable. So I'm sure there's lots of things that people can learn from what we're going to be talking about today. But just, I suppose, in your own words, really, I don't want to kind of start from, day one and work our way through, but let's say, the highlights of growing such a successful, lettings business early on. How did you find that journey? It's quite remarkable what you've done. So how did it happen?
Sure. The very, very short intro: left school at 16 with no qualifications, didn't go to university, got fed up working for other people in a job. So in my mid-20s, I quit, but I set up another business alongside it. That went very well. Launched another business in construction. We have one in construction, one in management training and development. And then September the 11th, foot and mouth disease happened back in 2001 for those people that are old enough to remember. And that had a devastating impact on both my businesses, one of which was put into voluntary liquidation. And we'd bought a house to live in. I had a newborn baby on the way, and I had to sell that house to avoid bankruptcy at the time. So I call that the worst experience of my life, because as probably most people can relate to, when things go wrong, you learn lessons. What would you do differently? And I decided to get involved in property. But I spent 2 years going on courses, reading magazines, buying books, getting mentors before I bought a single property. And I was lucky. I had a little drop shipping business 20 years ago that sustained my lifestyle. So that's what I did. I went all over America, all over the UK. And then in 2004, bought my first investment property, which was actually an HMO, a house in multiple occupation, for young working professional people, which are pretty common these days. But back then, everybody said, what the hell are you doing? You want to do student letting if you want to do HMOs. So bought one house using the funds that I had from the sale of my house, recycled that money, then started getting interest from friends and family. So I started teaching them how to do it, then started getting interest from investors. So started investing, doing joint ventures and that kind of thing. Built up a portfolio of about £6 million worth of HMOs, primarily in Bournemouth and Poole, down in Dorset, where I live. Wanted to keep it close to where I live. And that gave me my kind of financial independence day, where I had more income coming in from rental properties and profit than I needed to kind of live. I couldn't buy Necker Island. I was not Richard Branson or anything like that. And my accountant said, why don't you franchise your business? And that's really what led to the formation of PPP.
Wow. Okay. So it makes it sound very easy there. I'm sure there was lots of challenges. It's quite a big step to go from, managing your own properties to, turning that into a business. However, from what you've just said, it sounds like you're an entrepreneur, like through and through in the blood.
Yeah.
So was that a natural step for you to just, go from managing your own to creating a business out of it?
Yeah, I think it was, most entrepreneurs, as you know, are naturally optimistic, and most property investors, we are, divergent from the point of view of not, letting go of a job, starting your own career, going out on your own. Even if you buy a property portfolio alongside your job, there's still risk involved, right? Rents can go up and down, mortgage interest rates, utility bills, capital values fluctuate. Everybody thinks it's a guaranteed path to success, and it's not, frankly. You can do very, very well out of it. For me, I think I just got to a point where I had a decent sized portfolio. I had a decent amount of borrowing against that. And actually, I thought, from a balance sheet perspective, I don't want to take on more risk. You never know what's going to happen in the future. The best way to protect against that was cash flow. So had about 300% more rental income coming in than average buy-to-let investors. So that gave me that security, because I always, and I think it's a useful thing to do, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. So when I started buying property, I assumed capital values would go down, mortgage interest rates would go up, other running costs would go up, some tenants wouldn't pay their rent. So if you factor in and you have a spreadsheet that looks at all of those things, then you're pretty secure. And so it was a combination of not wanting to. I had a friend actually at the time who went to a hedge fund and said, I've got this. We started at the same time, 2004. And we both built up a similar size portfolio. I decided to franchise and teach other people, and he decided to go to the city and ask for 5 million quid. They said no, but if you want 50 million quid, then we'll back you. So he got 50 million quid, then he got 100, then he got 200 million, and then the credit crunch happened. And he personally guaranteed it. They called in the loans with 24 hours notice, and he went personally bankrupt.
Wow.
So when the credit crunch happened for me, because I'd franchised the business model, it was, so it wasn't a natural choice. It was risk aversion. But also my passion of teaching, training, coaching, mentoring. I do these, podcasts and things like that because I just love sharing my knowledge of both the things I've done well, but more importantly, probably the mistakes I've made as well. So not a natural choice, but it was for me.
It sounds, like, as you say, very risk averse, how you've stacked the deals, if you like. I mean, I'm amazed you bought any that with those kind of frames for, the sort of long term. Most people are the opposite. I find, they're looking to bank on the capital appreciation, and any cash flow is a bit of a bonus. So and I'm sure you've seen it as well, where as the mortgage rates have been so low, many people have come into property, into HMOs, or specifically HMOs or service accommodation, where they are covering the utility bills as well.
Yeah.
And now the rates have gone up, and so have the utility costs, and I guess finding themselves without anywhere near as much cash flow as they used to.
Sure thing.
However, there are other people who were, either more risk averse or got trained in just stack the deal at least 6% mortgage rates, and now they're okay. They're still making cash flow because it's stacked at the beginning. So how do you see that, sort of, if people were starting today with coming into property, would you still advise them of the same thing, to just plan for the worst?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody's situation is different, right? So I think that's the first thing to bear in mind. What I always say to people that haven't bought property is, if they really want to, for their own personal circumstances, always be thinking about what you're going to buy and the exit strategy for that, right? So not just, quite often I've encouraged people in the past, if they were looking at a 1-bedroom flat, to maybe get something a little bit, stretch themselves a little bit, something that will produce more rental income. Because if you can, buy a property and hold on to it for the long term, because historically, property's done very well over the long term. What do I think at the moment? I think if you are not in a situation where you are compelled to buy, with the economic uncertainty that we have at the moment, we've seen the first sort of annual fall in house prices for quite a long time. So then you look at interest rates, then you look at, I mean, the government have put in place a variety of different measures, as have the banks over the last few years, things like help to buy, right? Things like 0.25% interest rates, 0.5% interest rates. You look at what they're talking about doing now, putting a deferment in place of mortgage interest if people can't afford the increase in payments, because you've got all these people coming off of their low variable rates onto higher rates, and that's going to have a big impact on the market. So all the leading indicators that I see kind of tell me that we're going into a period of uncertainty and possibly a market correction, which is, you know, not necessarily a bad thing depending on your circumstances. You can make money in any market, right? You can absolutely, if you've got the right strategy, you can make money in any market. You can buy really cheap, you can add value, you can either sell or you can kind of rent and get good income. But my guidance to most people at the moment, if you don't need to buy, still learn, still get educated, still do your research. Still, I spent 2 years, right, and now I think if people are starting out, that education is absolutely key, because at some point the market will correct. We'll see how everything kind of washes through. And if capital values do correct, what a great buying opportunity, right? So yeah, that would probably be my guidance at the moment. And then the last thing, focus on cash flow, focus on income if you're doing it from a rental point of view.
Yeah, I think you're right. The market certainly lends itself to some of the more creative strategies, perhaps rent to rent or rent to SA, where people aren't having to find the deposit money and commit to, you know, to purchasing purchase lease options, for example. There's plenty of creative strategies that perhaps people who are new to the industry don't necessarily appreciate. So as you say, it's really about understanding what is possible, getting educated so that you can pick the right strategy for not just yourself and your own resources, but actually what the market's doing as well.
Sure.
Really important. Yeah. Okay. So and the letting side of things, is there any kind of patterns that you notice with building that business, and anything that you might do differently now?
Yeah, I think when I started renting property in the beginning, I did it myself. So I'm a great believer of getting hands-on, understand the business yourself. But there's an old saying, right? If you focus on your weaknesses, you just end up with a lot of well-developed weaknesses. So
Yeah.
it's like asking a fish to climb a tree, you know, so understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think there's a big point just about business and property and any form of investing, about knowing yourself, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, you know, what and I just realized that, yes, I could do tenant management. Yes, I could manage tradespeople, but did I really enjoy it? No. Was I good at it? Not really. You know, I was functional and I understood it. So I employed people to do that for me. Yeah, absolutely. And there might be a financial necessity. Sometimes we have to do things in life and in work and in business that we don't want to do, but you're not in a position to afford to pay anybody else to do it at that moment in time. So you just got to knuckle down and get on with it, right? So I think the problem with talking to people like me that's been in property for a long time, right, is we're a bit jaded. We've been through it. I've got they say 7 years and 10,000 hours to achieve mastery. Well, I've probably done 15 years and 20,000 hours in property. So I just kind of zoom out and look at the macro and sort of think, you know, I got into it at a really good time, got capital growth, focused on income. There was a financial crisis. Whereas now I look at purchase prices, they're a lot higher. I mean, rents are a lot higher. So that's been one of the benefits. You know, there's always, it's rare that everything goes against you, right? So in property, one of the things that has happened, if rents have gone up, you've got obviously things like the Renters Reform Bill coming in to try and address that balance. Because with a friend, Chris Cooper, we took the government to the High Court back in 2016 to try and overcome Section 24, which I still think is an outrageous tax on mortgage interest. It penalises people that are providing rental income and taxing them essentially on turnover, which is shocking. It's not done really anywhere in the world. In fact, it breaks accounting principles that are, you know, known around the world. So I think, the rental side, really, really important. You know, focus on the cash flow, consider buying through a limited company rather than in an individual name. So it's really about having a power team of advisors, having the knowledge, the support, the education, which is what you guys provide, but also then having a team of professionals and experts around you that can guide you in the right direction. Yeah.
How do you think that, obviously, you've mentioned quite a few of the challenges that are involved in the property world at the moment, and there has been times where perhaps it's been easier for some people, and now it might be harder for others, but essentially everyone's in the same boat now, so they're all starting off, people coming in with this section 24 and the reform and etc. So how do you think that will shape the way that investors invest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely much more, if you want to build a property business, it's a much more sophisticated and professional operation than it used to be, right? Every year it's got harder and harder. There's more legislation. The government are supposed to simplify the tax system. They complicate it. They're supposed to simplify legislation. They complicate it. So I definitely think it's harder. But if people are starting out and they have a personal desire, to buy a property, live in, or to buy their first property to rent out, the fundamentals are still the same, right? Focus on right house, right location, buying it as cheaply as you can, maximizing the rental income, trying to systemize the business in a way that you can, and also not putting all your eggs in one basket. I think actually the days of just telling people to do property and that will be great. I think those days are long gone, frankly. I think it's much more sophisticated. And especially,
there's a few different ways of looking at it. So obviously you've got the property portfolio up and running, and then that allowed you to go into the letting side, and then you exited that and went into the business world, and continued on from there. So I think for a lot of people getting involved in property, they are not necessarily looking to build a huge, property portfolio business or have, hundreds of houses. Like, their primary goal is to replace their income from the day job and buy back their time. So actually, with a handful of well structured deals, that is very achievable. Would you agree?
I think anything's possible, right? So I've been out of it for 3 years. So things like, we talk about serviced accommodation. My sister does that. She's got Airbnbs in a big block of 16 flats. So there are definitely other ways of making money from property. But I think I'm not an expert in it now because I've been out of it quite a while. So I knew how to build a property portfolio of HMOs that help people, do exactly that, right? Generate 50 to 100,000 pounds with between 4 and 6 houses generally. Now, to do that certainly in London and the Southeast, you probably, instead of needing 300 grand, to get into it, you probably need £750,000 to £1 million. The purchase price is a lot higher. The yields have compressed. So I think that's another key point, Michelle, actually, is the location is really important. So matching that strategy that you're talking about with the right location, down where I am at the moment in Bournemouth and in Poole in Dorset, HMO price is much, much higher than they used to be. But actually things like serviced accommodation can work really, really well. And I've seen a lot of people in the local area pivot from HMOs into serviced accommodation or other types of things, or just be really smart about the HMOs they buy, where they might have something with 3 bedrooms and think, well, actually, I can get planning for an extension, or it's got a garage and I can get 2 extra bedrooms out of that. So you're taking a smaller property and being very efficient by making it bigger and increasing your return.
Yeah, getting educated is really absolutely essential right now to just understand all your options.
Awesome.
For sure. So how does your experience in the business world relate to how you saw property and how you managed your property business?
So I'd been in business myself since 94 and then started buying property in 2004. So that was useful because I had the experience of setting up a company, tax, employees, being an employer, all of the kind of core functions of running a business was really useful. And I took that in. There's some really great books, right? And you probably, I'm sure, read them as well. Things like the E-Myth, the Entrepreneurial Myth by Michael Gerber. It's one of my books. You've got a whole series of them. I spoke on stage with Michael Gerber actually about 15 years ago, and he said, wow, "You're the first person in the world I know that's franchise real estate investing. Will you write a book with me?" And I said, "I'd love to." I saw that as a real compliment. I then found out about 3 phone calls later he wanted to charge me 100 grand for the privilege of writing a book with him, and I had to do all the writing. So but the benefit of doing that, reading that book and going through that consultancy process in the 90s, it's all about systemization. So I think actually having a systems-based mindset was, it's just a really, really useful thing to do.
Yeah, that systems, obviously, getting that right from the beginning really can either set yourself up to succeed or fail very quickly. And I'm sure you've seen it with lots of people that you mentor as well. But the E-Myth does talk about wearing lots of different hats, and as entrepreneurs in property, it's not just understanding about bricks and mortar and tenants and what the government are doing. It's also about marketing and systems, etc. So how have you managed to juggle so many different roles in different industries?
Just experience, actually. I think if I look back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and I just look at what I do today, 10 years ago, looking forward, I would have been like, you'd never be able to do that, right? So I think everybody, when you start out, it's a mistake people make, right? Sometimes they look up too much. I'm a great believer we should go through life reaching a hand up, asking for help, learning from others that have been there and done it, but also reaching a hand down to help other people on their journey as well. Because so I think don't be overwhelmed when you hear stories from me or other people and you just think, I could never achieve that. I could never, build a property portfolio, franchise it, pivot into a completely different industry, launch an angel investing fund that raises millions of pounds. I wouldn't have thought I could do that 20 years ago, right? It was quite overwhelming buying my first house. Right. I remember talking to the estate agents for the first time, frankly, shitting myself. Right. Just didn't know what to say. Didn't know. They were just asking me all these questions in language I didn't understand. Have you got funds on account with solicitor? I was like, no, didn't even really know what that meant at the time. So, and then that happened with a lot of people that I mentored. So I think having that empathy, we do it as adults, we do it as parents, where sometimes you forget where you came from. And I think it's really important to remember that actually most things are scary the first time you do it. That's why education and good advisors is fundamentally important, because you get the right people around you and the right information stops you making some of the big mistakes. And you're always going to make mistakes. I think the key thing is not making the really big ones, right? Like buying the wrong house that doesn't have the right unit economics, that is in the wrong area, or assuming you can get planning permission, you can't, all of these things. So have that team to help you avoid the really big mistakes, but accept the fact you are gonna have some.
Yeah. And when you talk about, you obviously mentor other people in their journeys, what are the patterns that you see through the mentees that succeed versus the ones that don't?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but I probably mentored over 1,000 people when I did used to do that. What do you think? It's desire, actually, is the most important thing. It was never the people I've worked with that had the most money that were necessarily the most successful. There's normally a reason, unless they've inherited it, why they've been able to create a certain amount of wealth. So desire, really important. Understanding numbers, the unit economics, understanding finances. I wasn't great at maths at school, but I learned when my first business failed back in 2001. That was I didn't understand the numbers enough. We just delegated it to other people. And actually we needed to be in control and understand, profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flow. So those things that if people are thinking about going into property and they don't understand those terms, or they don't understand how to read or put together a P&L, balance sheet and a cash flow, fundamentally important. Robert Kiyosaki talks about it in his book, right, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that the first thing you should do is hire a part-time bookkeeper. And I read that. I'd actually done it sort of previously, but I read that one and then I did it. I paid them 2 hours a month. It was like 20 quid a month, right? But actually they would come in, they would just go through personal finance with me and have a look at it. So having that understanding of numbers, I think, is really, really important. And then an ability, a degree of self-confidence, because you've got to take risks, you've got to be your own boss, you've got to have the courage of your convictions to go out there. But also the last one, I think, really important, you've got to be teachable. You've got to be willing to learn. I just find too many, oh no, that won't work, or they either suffer from analysis paralysis, where they just overthink it and don't actually do anything, or they get really good advice and don't listen to it. And so those would be my top 4.
Yeah, it's interesting that 3 out of those 4 are actually something that's kind of innate, that you can't really teach somebody. So, learning about the P&L and the accounts and that kind of thing, that's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. Anyone can pretty much learn the skill set of doing that. So, but having that desire and that fire in the belly, I think I agree, it's really important, especially as we talked about different challenges. And just, if you're going to be in property for the long term, then you need to expect these and have that resilience and the tenacity to just keep on going. So, and do you have a mentor now?
Yeah, I have mentors all the time, more business partners that I work with on a regular basis, so kind of co-collaborators. That every business I've ever had, actually, I've always had business partners. I think some people are inclined to that. Some people have got horrific experiences of business partnership. I have some of those as well, but it didn't put me off. It just, like, learning, why did that one go wrong, or why did that one not work out, how to get the right business partners. I think it's probably the person you marry or choose to have kids with and the business partners you have, I think, are 2 of the most under-recognized and yet fundamentally important drivers of either success or failure in people's lives. And so more time going into thinking about not just like there's the right sort of connection and we want to do this together, let's go for it. I mean, I've literally had one business partnership that was formed by me saying we should start a business together, and the other person thinking in their head, well, what's the worst can happen? Yeah, why not? And shaking hands over a cup of coffee. Fortunately, that was one of the ones that worked out really well. But the ones that have it, it's like an alignment of values, I think, is very under-recognized in business partnerships. So having that understanding that you've got the right values, you want to achieve the similar things, and structuring it in the right way, because I can guarantee you one thing with any business partnership, at some point they will diverge, right? People get divorced, people have health challenges, people want to go off in a different direction. Some people are super ambitious, some people get bored and want to pivot into another industry. So I'm a really strong advocate, actually, of partnerships, but just really think about them and try and structure them in the right way.
So if you were to start a new partnership today, how would you assess someone's values early on? And let's make a distinction between their personality and how well you get on with them, and their skill set versus their character, I guess.
Yeah. So in an ideal world, so there's a great online exercise. I think it's called the Values Effect or the Values Factor by John DeMartini. Dr. John DeMartini. Brilliant. 13 questions, free. Go online. Both of you fill it in honestly, and then compare notes, right? And if you are way off in terms of the things you really care about, it's important people fill that in honestly. That, for me, has been one of the best indicators I've ever come across to understand people's values. So I think that one's really useful. Take your time. So make it a multi-stage process. Check those people out and get them to do the same with you. I'd like to talk to their parents, people that they shared a room with in university, right? Really do the same way of like you would as a really good employer, right? You'd get proper background checks. And then people that you really trust, that really know you, get them also to spend time. Because I think, just intuitively, I think women generally have a better judge of character than men. Sometimes we're just so blinkered. So I always really value the opinion of both men and women about people, because sometimes I've been, a load of guys or business partners I've got said, oh yeah, they're really good, and yeah, he's a great guy, and this, that, and the other, and then my partner or my sister will say, do you know what, actually something doesn't feel right, something, I'm not sure what it is, I can't put my finger on it. And guess what, 9 times out of 10 that in the fullness of time has turned out to be true, so I should have listened.
Wow. And how does it, so let's wrap up with mentors then. How do you choose your mentors? If you to choose one today and you want, obviously that differs from a lifelong business partnership, but
Sure.
how does that work?
So for me, I'm quite geeky, right? I have spreadsheets for most things, and it includes mentors and my network. So I created probably 15 years ago because you heard the old saying, you become the average of the people you spend most time with, or you're more likely to. So what I did is I created a spreadsheet, and you can either do this for your mentors, or you can do it for your existing network or a new network you're looking to build. And then down the side, you list their names of the spreadsheet in the kind of left-hand column. And then across the top, the criteria that you want to kind of analyze, basically. So it might be things like health, it might be wealth, it might be happiness, as generic topics. But then as specific topics, you might say, I need somebody who's really good in finance because that's a weakness that I have, or somebody that's got a lot of property knowledge. I want a property mentor. And so what I tend to do with my existing network, I always start, 7 times quicker, cheaper, easier to work with people you already know that are in your world. I score them -3 to +3 on each of these scales. Right. So if you were scoring me, you might say, oh, Steve might be on property knowledge. Residential property knowledge might be a +3. Okay. Because he's done a lot and he's been there. But actually, when it comes to current information about lettings and the legal system and the renters reform bill, you might score me a 0 or -1 because I've been out of it for 3 years and I'm an active angel investor now. And so I might get a lower score in that regard. So for business strategy and growing a big portfolio, you might come to me, somebody like me as a mentor, whereas for the detail bit. So I always think having a numerical way of kind of analyzing people is a good thing to do. Word of mouth is always a great thing, right? Not getting drawn in by some of the hype that's out there, right? I've been involved with 3 legal cases, one of which resulted in somebody being put in prison, a property guru that actually spoke at a property event quite a long time ago and was voted by 200 people in the audience out of all the speakers that day as the most ethical, trustworthy, honest person in the industry. Right. So there's always in this industry charlatans, sharks that are generally brilliant marketeers, right? Brilliant at presenting a public face, but not necessarily having the substance, or there's, legal cases going on in the background and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, so asking around, YPN's got great source of information. There's some really good property forums out there, like, Property Tribes, and I don't know if it's still going. Property 118 used to be pretty good, where you're crowdsourcing opinions from people and you can just post for free and say, what do you think? I always think another good one is put the name of the company or the individual into Google or ChatGPT and put scam at the end of it, or lawsuits or court cases, and that can actually be quite revealing sometimes.
That's lots of top tips there, and quite logical as well. I like it. Takes the emotion out of it. Sometimes it's important to
and that bit's important, right? You got to not always. I think there's an old saying, separate the learning from the teacher. So sometimes just because, if it's a short-term interaction, you just want to solve a problem and you need a couple of hours of input, you might, like one of my favorite books actually is called No Angel by Bernie Eccleston, and it's his life story. It is the antithesis of how I would live my life and how I operate in business, but really useful to understand. And I got some good stuff from it, right? Not everything the guy has done in building Formula One has been bad. Obviously, some of it's commercially been good, but having bouncers, giving people death threats and that sort of thing is not the kind of life that I would want to lead, and having court cases over his head every day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, just tell us a bit about what you're up to now then. So angel investing and, what does life look like now?
Yeah, so I've got an angel investing fund. It's called Bolt Angels. We do angel and venture investing. Really efficient from a tax point of view. You can, if anybody's paid capital gains tax or is going to pay capital gains tax from selling property, which obviously is 28% rather than the normal 20%, you can roll that tax that you paid or are going to pay into investments, EIS qualifying investments. You get 30% back of income tax when you make the investment pretty soon afterwards from HMRC. So it's pretty rare to get somebody I spoke to recently invested 25 grand and got a 7 grand check back from HMRC in the same tax year. So that's kind of quite unusual. Zero capital gains tax. They can be inheritance tax free. So there's a million tax benefits. And, you know, when I went to the High Court to take on HMRC about the tenant tax, then I just realized you're fighting against a conservative government, or any government that wants to tax landlords to oblivion, it seems. Whereas when you invest in businesses, it's the complete opposite. You're seen as a knight in shining armor, and all these tax benefits. So that's what we do. EIS investments in fast growth startups, primarily in the tech sector now. Most recent one we exited achieved 46 times return, which is obviously, people say, oh, it's impossible, but people told me it was impossible to get 300% more rental income from HMOs when I started doing it, right? Nobody was doing professional let HMOs in the UK back in 2004, or very few people. And we went on to create over 7,000 rooms. So same with angel investing. People have this notion that, oh, it's long-term, it's high risk, it's going to fail. Well, at the moment, we've got an incredible success rate on the 5 that we've done. They're all still trading. Some we've exited from. They can also produce income, which some people don't understand. You can get 7 to 10% income from certain angel investments. So that's what I focused on. I really doubled down on that. Democratized fund ownership. So we have at the moment about 30 shareholders in the business that are minority shareholders. So like PPP, right? I get bored and don't enjoy just doing things on my own. It was so satisfying building a community of over 400 franchisees and seeing them have, you know, massive lifestyle changes, which property can do, but also angel investing can do. So I've exited my residential and commercial property, because of the macro, but also for personal reasons. Been there, done it, had the portfolio, got bored, wanted to do new challenges, and I've never come across a property that can give you a 46% return on, 46 times, not percent, 46 times return on your money in 2 or 3 years. So that's what I do now, is try and find unicorns, find the next unicorn.
So go on then. I'm sure people if some people might think they have a unicorn. What is a unicorn business to you?
So a unicorn has to grow to be worth over £1 billion in value, or $1 billion. So that's the kind of the definition of a unicorn. So we tend to get involved when a business is valued, you know, usually between 2 and 10 million. Sometimes up to the current investment we're doing is valued at 45 million. But we want to invest in things that we think have a minimum 20 times uplift within 3 to 5 years, which again sounds very difficult to do. And frankly, it is. But when you've been doing it a long time, you've got an amazing team, amazing network, it genuinely is possible. And even if it's not, right, even if you get double your money or triple your money, if you get in early, then and with all the tax benefits, that's where, I mean, people say it's the business you were born to lead. I loved property as a means to an end, and I still think it's a phenomenal wealth creation tool done in the right way at the right time with the right strategy. But actually, the toilets, tenants, tradespeople, I used to outsource, you know, that bit I never enjoyed, whereas I'm genuinely passionate about businesses that change the world. And so for me, I found it's a bit frustrating. It took me till I was 54 to find the asset class that I really am going to be investing into for the rest of my life. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't mind being as frustrated as you by 54. Wow, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all your insights, and it's great to have someone with such diverse experience on and can have that high level picture. And it's great to see, you know, that property has, you know, allowed you to achieve your goals, and you know, you've come full circle, really, starting business through property and then and then coming out with the other side. So where can people find out more about what you're up to, or if they think they've got a unicorn business and they're interested in reaching out?
Yeah, so we've got on the Bolt Angels website, boltangels.co.uk is a good place to go. There's a free resources section. So I have a podcast called Be an Angel. And then I also have a free masterclass, Angel Investing Masterclass. So that's on there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We put posts out daily on LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, that sort of stuff. But I would say TikTok and LinkedIn are my main sort of social platforms.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time again, and we look forward to seeing what's next.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Michelle.
Thanks, Steve. For anyone else who is not yet a subscriber to the magazine, click the link below for your free 30-day trial. See you next time, guys.